Welcome to our series called Firing Up Your Teaching. It's our privilege to be presenting to you several modules on great teaching and learning. I think you'll be excited about the journey you'll be on to improve your teaching skills, but also see the results among your students, which is the whole purpose of this. So I'm Dr. Gary Damore, a former professor here and administrator at Arizona Christian University, currently doing some consulting work.
And I'm Dr. Linnea Lyding, and I am the department chair for the education department, and I also teach numerous classes here.
Great. So, Linnea, let's tell them why we chose to call this Fire Up Your Teaching.
Yeah. Because FIRE is the motto for our school. So it's faith, influence, relationship, and excellence. And that's really what this is all about. You guys are the experts in your subject area. And so we want to help you really pass that information on to your students so that they really can become excellent in that area as well.
So that's really kind of the foundation. Those are the pillars of our university. And we want education to be, a school is all about teaching and learning. And we want this university to be known for outstanding teaching and with great results for our students. So we are going to begin by giving you kind of the overview of the entire process, and then we'll be cutting it into several modules thereafter that you can pick and choose the ones that you want to watch. And you might want to go back and visit those several times, but we'll begin by giving you an overview.
So we just want you to think for a second. What do you want to see when you look at your classroom? Do you want to see students like this? Are you thinking that maybe students might be really interested in their phones, and are you worried that they might be more interested in their phones than in you? Or do you want to see students who are looking at you, waiting for the next thing that you're going to talk about, or maybe just talking about your subject matter? So we're going to look at, I'm assuming that most of you probably want that last two scenarios, and so we're going to kind of give you some ideas on how that might happen.
You know, and some of you have maybe a lot of experience teaching and some of you have none. But let us warn you that if you have no teaching experience, you love your subject matter and you're really passionate about what you want to teach, that picture that you saw of students who were not engaged is pretty common. Technology is a great tool, but it's a great distractor too. Mm-hmm. And so you'll find that what we're going to be teaching during this series is ways to use technology to engage your students rather than seeing it as just a constant nuisance to you and in the way of your instruction.
So first of all, we just wanted to start off with some things that learners today are saying. They're natural collaborators. They want to work in groups and want to talk with each other.
And we're finding that for all ages of whether it's little kids, like in a kindergarten classroom or in a college traditional classroom. But we've noticed that with our adult students in our evening program as well. They really like to engage because they bring a wealth of experience to the table, life experience outside of the textbook.
Exactly.
So it doesn't matter what age the students are. This fact is true for all learners.
Right. Now, Barna tells us that millennials are craving depth. So they really want to learn the material and they want to learn it deeply. So we're going to give you some strategies later on to really how you can do that with your students.
And they expect to participate as well as consume. That this is a Kinnaman quote that you're looking at there, that students don't just want to sit passively and take in, we open up their heads and pour knowledge into their heads. They actually want to get engaged in it. And so this is true not just about the classroom environment, it's who they are as people. We see them always wanting to be participants in the process. And that's true in the classroom as well.
And I think that goes back even to our FIRE when we talk about relationships and how they're going to influence people. They're going to be able to influence people if they're really good conversationalists, if they really can talk about their subject matter. They're going to be able to share their faith that way. So just gravitating again towards those group activities. And the last thing, it's kind of interesting because Case Western University started a Center for Teaching and Learning for their professors, all of their faculty, because students were leaving. They were saying, hey, we're paying a lot of money for this, so we're going to go where we get good teaching. We get what we're asking for. So it's another reason we do this.
It's a real key issue today. College education is very expensive. People are taking out serious loans to go to college. Value is an issue for them. So you want to make sure that you're providing them, they're getting what they paid for. And students are feeling that again, at all levels. So we want to always start with an objective. One of the things that you'll find that Linnea and I like to do is that we will always teach you content, but we'll also teach you process at the same time. So we always call it we have two agendas that run parallel to each other. It's not just what we say, but how we say it and how we present it. And although this medium is a little bit different than being live in a classroom, we're going to try to replicate those concepts pretty consistently. And so one of the things that we're going to be learning, but we're also going to model, is the concept of presenting an objective. What is a learning objective? So I'll let you start with that.
So this objective for this module is that after you've watched it, you're going to be able to list the essential elements of an effective lesson, and you're going to be able to explain what effect they have on teaching and learning. So that's our objective for this particular module.
You know, and just looking at this next visual here, the why is important in everything we do. I'm a real fan of Simon Sinek, who wrote the book Leaders Eat Last. And one of the things that he talks about in his book is that if we know the why of what we're doing, everything else seems to flow out of that and flow easily. And the why needs to be at the very core and the very center of what we're doing. So the big why is, why are we doing this session? And why even have a series on good teaching and learning? One of the things that I've found is that I've interviewed a lot of candidates over the years for positions in higher education in particular, and what I found was that people knew, especially in a Christian environment like this, they were passionate about their faith, they were passionate about their subject area, and they had the credentials to back it up. But then when they got in front of the classroom, they didn't know what to do. And so what the big why on this whole series is, we want to improve instruction, give you the skills, the tools that you need as an instructor to be a great teacher, and we want to see great student results as a result of having great teaching. And that's the why. The how that you see in that concentric circle there, that's what we're going to teach you, are some of the processes that you can put into place and use those essential elements and incorporate those elements in your lesson planning. The product will be what your lesson plans look like, and then as you execute those lesson plans, what your lessons look like. And the big what is, how do your students do? How do they respond? What have they learned? Do you feel like their capacity for learning your subject area has been enlarged, that they're really retaining the kinds of things that you want them to retain from the lessons that you teach? And that's what all of this is going to do for you.
Yeah, because remember, you want to influence them, and you're building relationships, so you want them to be relational, and you want them to be excellent. So if we keep thinking about the FIRE, then I think it helps us remember why we want to do these things.
Yeah,
that's
very good.
So what are the essential elements?
Well, the essential elements begin with good learning objectives. We told you what we wanted to see out of this module. We want what we expect you to learn, and those are the outcomes for this module. So sometimes a learning objective is called an outcome, and it starts with knowing what it is yourself, and then communicating that with your students.
Yeah, and so first of all, you want to grab them when they come in, because they're coming in from outside. They may be coming from practice. They may be just been on the phone with a friend or thinking about what they're doing over the weekend. So we need to think about anticipatory set, or that hook, like how you get them involved right away, change what they're thinking about.
And get really focused on your lesson and your topic for the day. Right. So those two things work very closely together. Knowing what your objectives are and then hooking them really sets the stage for students will know, where are we going today? What's the purpose of the lesson and where are we headed? And then communicating it, as I said, is really essential too. It's one thing for you to know what the objective is, but if your students don't, they're going to still be kind of out there in limbo, not really clear on where are we going with today's lesson. And then, of course, what everybody knows is direct instruction. When we think about teaching and learning, people always go right to standing in front of a class, lecturing and giving some good information. But there's a lot more to it prior. That is an essential element, but not the only element.
Well, and the thing that we have to keep in mind with that, too, is that the research really shows that after about 8 minutes or so, the student will automatically start thinking about something else. So if you plan that in your instruction, if you're going to give a lecture and you keep your lecture short and then break it up at that 8-minute time, maybe with questions or something, and we'll give you lots of strategies to do that. But just think about that. think about only teaching for about 8 minutes, because their minds will wander whether or not.
And Linnea's and her staff have come up with a little clever saying for this too. They call it chunk and chew. You want to tell them a little bit about
Yeah, so I mean, basically
about that?
teach a chunk of information and then give the students an opportunity to chew on it. So whether they're talking to the person next to them, whether you have them, we'll talk about some other strategies, poll everywhere. There's lots of different things that they can do. Maybe it's an activity, a specific thing that they're going to create based on what you've taught them. But think about chunking, give them a chunk, and then letting them chew on it and think about it, process it.
And when you're looking in the literature to find out what, how does research back this up, that's where you'll see those terms for checking for understanding and guided practice. So you give the direct instruction, that's the chunk. But the chew part is the checking for understanding and giving them an opportunity to guide them through the practice so that they're beginning to own this information instead of it just being delivered to them didactically. So.
And then we don't want you to forget, once you go through that, then you still want to come back and bring that objective in. What was it that you wanted them to be able to do by the end of the class? And how are you going to know that? So some really quick little way to kind of end it and bring it full circle. That's the closure.
And I always, I always used to, when I've taught these classes before, I've talked to my students about thinking about going home as a student and your mom or dad says to you, "What'd you learn today?" And I've always framed that when I teach my classes. I've always said, I've asked my students, if someone were to see you in the hallway as you walk out of here today and go out that door, and they asked you, what did you learn in that class today? They should be able to articulate the objective and the outcome and clearly state what today's lesson was about. If they've done that, then you've done your job and everybody wins.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's kind of the overview, and then I guess the last piece is the independent practice, where really then they're prepared to be turned loose. We always talk about the fact that practice does not make perfect. If you have a bad golf swing and you practice the bad golf swing 1,000 times, you're going to still have a bad golf swing. If you're learning to play a piece on the piano and you play it wrong 1,000 times, you will never get any better at it. So practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Yes. And so you don't want to turn students loose to do independent practice and more independent work until you've done all the other elements, because now you know that you've guided them, they're on the right track, and they're not going to be getting off track and learning some bad things and bad habits. And so independent practice really comes at the end of all of that. And that's kind of one of the things, a good technique to remember to teach is what we call hold-aparts. We've just given you the whole thing, and it might be a little overwhelming at first to think of all of that stuff. Then we're going to give you the parts, we're going to break it down into chunks, and then we'll pull all the pieces back together again. When you teach a lesson, this is this dual agenda kind of thing that we've been talking about. When you teach a lesson, think about whole to parts. Give your learners the big picture because it gives them the context for what they're going to be learning, and then break it down in those parts. But then when you pull that whole unit together, you want to pull all those parts together again and give them the whole as a kind of a wrap-up. So.
You might be wondering about that thread it's next to the picture, and you'll see it throughout all of our modules, but it's about engagement. So engagement is a thread that connects everything together. The whole time you're going to be wanting to think about, how can I engage my students? How can I make sure and measure that they are actually interested in what's going on? So we're going to be we have two modules on engagement alone, so we'll give you some good information.
And that goes back to what we talked about. This is based on the research that the way that we look at modern learners in this century with technology and all the things that are at their disposal. What they're craving and what they need is engagement. And so that's why it's so critical and why it's a thread that runs through all the elements.
So we now have kind of put side by side the essential elements and just some of those comments, and we would like you to kind of look at those and think about how they relate. So if we talk about students gravitate towards group activity, what part of your lesson does that come in? How does that relate? What could you do to take advantage of knowing that fact?
So this is a good time for you to stop the video, take a few minutes, really literally look at your watch and take 60 seconds. This is a good technique that you can use in your classroom as well, where you watch your watch. It makes good use of time and it keeps people, your learners, really focused on getting the task done. Take only 60 seconds, take a look at this slide, and see if you can come up with some answers for those questions.
Okay, what we'd like you to do right now is take out a piece of paper, and we want you to number it 1 through 7. We have some true-false questions that are all research-based, and we want you just to take a minute and answer these questions. These questions are going to show up throughout the rest of our modules, so we kind of stuck them in places that seemed appropriate for what we were talking about in the module.
And you can use this technique in your teaching as well. Give them a couple of examples how they might use that.
I use it a lot at the beginning of class. You know, I'll have students do this true false, and I actually like to have them vote with their feet. So I have them stand on one side if they think it's true, on the other side if they think it's false, and then I don't tell them the answer. And then that makes them want to know. So they're like, well, wait, what's the answer? And I'm like, you'll find out. And so then as we go through class, then they can find out what the answer is. Sometimes I tell them right away because I just want to do some introduction of some material. But that's one way that I use it.
And you can use it as a review to kind of connect from yesterday's lesson to today's, and kind of, I've noticed that in the degree completion program that we have classes that only meet once a week, and so that's a long time between lessons. And I've observed a professor doing this very well, where he puts these true-false questions. And you might think that true-false questions are easy, but well-written true-false questions are really challenging to think about. And so you can use it as a bridge from one lesson to the next. You can also use it as a closure, which is what we're doing right now. We're using this as a closure. So a closing activity, and then we have one more follow-up closing activity for you.
So just, again, we're modeling what we're explaining. So what we want you to do now is, if you remember our objective at the beginning, we wanted you to be able to list the elements and tell us why they're important. So we're asking you to shoot an email to somebody you know that's teaching at another university and tell them. Tell them what's important, what the elements are, and why they are important to learn.
Yeah, go back and pull up that slide maybe and take a look at what those elements are. List those, and then what have you learned from this first module, and share that with a colleague. It will help solidify the things that you've learned, and also might motivate someone else to take the module after you. So that's it, Module 1.
Thank you.